Hello there everyone, welcome to a Second Thoughts overview of one of the most hated characters in the franchise, good old Mannfred von Carstein of the Vampire Counts. I played the initial turns, getting a hold of how the faction plays out. These are my conclusions, and in the end I'll showcase my army compositions for fun. This is not an in-depth guide, but has all that you need to engage in this campaign. Let's play then with Mannfred von Carstein. So for your short victory conditions, we need to destroy the Khemri faction, so Cetra, and the Cult of Sigma, located here. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward, very close by. We also need to control the Black Pyramid of Nagash, either by vassals, military allies, or direct ownership. And then to occupy, loot, razor, sack 30 different settlements. Completing this will give us 15% casualty replenishment rate to all armies. Now, this is quite a very short one. I mean, it's two enemies really close by, then you have a specific territory. Yes, this should be an easy victory, an easy campaign actually. However, things change when we get to the long victory. So to the long victory, something was wrong with this. You need to achieve the short victory conditions, occupy, loot, razor, sack 75 different settlements, and then to control all of the empire, which is here. Which really does not make too much sense. I think the long victory must have been, they must have been overlooked, because you also need to destroy Reichland. While achieving this, Winds of Magic power reserve capacity plus 35 to all armies. It would appear this is more of an objective to anyone, being in Sylvania. So, well, that's what it is. So it is entirely possible that you actually achieve domination campaign before a long campaign, which I honestly have. I didn't rush it, so I actually went and won domination before the long campaign victory. But still, if you manage to do so, if you focus on going just towards the Empire, the Winds of Magic for all armies, it's not too bad. Especially for the Vampire Counts, of course, it helps. Now, Mannfred has the Legions of the Dead. He's able to collect the Books of Nagash, more on that on the mechanics. He gains access to a unique building in Drakenhof, which doubles the effects of his collected Books of Nagash. So once more, it forces you to go there. Then you start with one Blood Kiss, that helps, and diplomatic relations with vampiric factions and Follows of Nagash, as well as research rate plus 30%. It's an excellent set of good buffs. It's all cool. So the diplomatic relations, if you can manage the Follows of Nagash to stay alive, they'll become an ally with you for the rest of the campaign. I managed to do that until domination victory, so it was really great. He was supportive. Research rate always helpful, and everything else, it just fits into the mechanics of the Books of Nagash. Now, in terms of climates, it's a little bit, it does like somewhat, I would say average to poor. Suitable climates are not too shabby, but then you have unpleasant with the mountains and temperate islands and even savanna, frozen. Let me show you here. So in a moment, now you can see all the penalties that we have there, and it's not really that pretty. A lot of yellow, yes, and a lot of green, but too much red, honestly, for my choice, especially with the frozen, not just the chaos wastelands, just the frozen. If you go over here, the biggest problem is that nearly everything is yellow, so it's always unpleasant terrain. But yeah, it's still a decent faction, let's say, to conquer the map. I was actually under the impression that it would be a little bit more red reading through that, so I'm kind of pleased now that I see it, but still not the easiest faction to conquer the whole map with. In terms of the starting location, we start with a 3-settlement province, and you're surrounded actually by enemies. It's one of the, if not the most difficult campaign in that regard, because you're really surrounded. Now, Volkmar, let me just list. Volkmar, Cetra, Scarbrand over there, then you have the dwarves, have wood elves around here, so it's all different enemies, which is even worse. And everyone is going to declare war very soon. You should be able to go through the initial turns, but as soon as you reach out to other locations, let's say as soon as you deal with Volkmar, you have tic-tac-toe and he'll declare. You deal with tic-tac-toe and you'll have whoever is on the south dominating, either Teclis or Kairos will declare on you, and then you have the Lost Defender. So the typical expansion that you do will always bring out more enemies. You should be able to overcome all of that, especially if you make like a border, for instance, which is what I'm talking about now. Typical expansions, I would say, because of the objectives, it will lure you into a little bit more of the north of the area, maybe into the barren locations, into the Badlands. Unless Arkan is destroyed, I wouldn't count on conquering this area of Araby here, because if he's conquered, of course, if he's destroyed, you might want to have it for yourself, but if not, just leave it a little bit for his area. And then typical expansion going into the south. I would not advise, I made this a mistake on actually one campaign, to go into the southern wastes too fast, because otherwise, you know, because of the climate and such, I wouldn't advise it. So I will always advise to dominate the Southlands and then to proceed north if you wish to go for the long campaign victory. That seems to be a good idea, a typical expansion. Always remember, more enemies along the way. This is the campaign where people will complain that whenever they expand, they just get more enemies, for sure. So, diplomatically, you're one of the most hated factions in the game. Skaven, Vampire Coast, and Arkan, and that's it. Everyone else will hate you and most likely declare on you sooner or later. Now, I may try to change this by gifting settlements or bribing other factions, but it's not an easy faction to do so. Most of the time, you'll have some bonuses towards the Followers of Nagash and other vampiric factions. Maybe you can try to do something with that, but still, not an easy one to have friends with. It is quite vulnerable to an early Order Tide massive alliance. So High Elves, Reichland, Bretonia, Dwarves, if they will all send armies for certain as soon as you reach a certain point of, you know, strength. That's the main issue here. Now, as for outposts, they're still very much possible and likely. We have maybe the Skaven. I managed to get all these during a campaign. So Skaven for missiles and artillery, the Tomb Kings as well for anything that shoots, basically, and the same thing for the Vampire Coast. The Vampire Coast are probably one of the best. I managed to get, just to let you know, I managed to get an alliance with Sartosa, and it lasted for the whole domination campaign. It was great. I got lots of cannons, lots of handgunners, lots of stuff that, you know, helped through to make the experience much more viable, much more profitable, much more enlightening, let's say. So yeah, it's entirely possible, and these are the ones that I will try to do in my campaigns. So, in terms of mechanics, Raise the Dead is your top means of recruitment. You fight battles, you stand them on top of them on the battlefield, and you watch them raise. I can show you some markings for sure, such as this one, for instance. So, because of this battle, additional more powerful units may be available in the region's Raise Dead pool. So, basically, anywhere that you have these markings, it will have much better units, and you can increase this as well with research, so it's excellent. I can tell you that most of my armies in this game were actually raised from the dead instead of actually recruited, which is, you know, it falls down into the type of playthrough that you're hoping for with an army such as the Vampire Counts. Now, Books of Nagash, they provide you some decent bonuses, but some may be quite difficult to get as they're so far away. You can see, like, for instance, I still haven't got this one, or even this one. I haven't, you know, reached out specifically to go in this campaign towards the Books of Nagash, but I've managed to collect a few of them. And all of these have really cool effects, as you can see there. It's mainly a series of buffs that implies that you need to fulfill a specific objective. And there's even a little bit of lore. I really appreciated the small details there. So basically, collect the Books of Nagash, get all those bonuses, and you can even double them with a specific building that you can build here in Castle Drakenhof, which I have, which is this one, the Malevolent Museum. Pretty cool. Now, in terms of the blood kisses, let's talk about blood kisses. You accumulate them and then you collect for the bloodlines. These are also a series of buffs that will remain for the duration of the campaign, and they're really good. Talking about vampiric corruption, we're talking about research rate, upkeep for all armies reduced, several good ones, even the character experience gain. So it allows you, the way that it works is that it allows you to select firsts. Like for instance, maybe you want casualty replenishment rate, the first one, and I did, so it was excellent to start immediately with that. Adding to the short victory condition, you can see that I already had 25% extra casualty replenishment rate very shortly into the campaign. So there's several options that you have here, and these provide you with each a lord. It doesn't really tell you. It tells you awoken one lord from this bloodline. So basically you'll get 3 from von Carstein, 3 blood dragons, 3 Lamians, 3 Necrarch, and 3 Strigoi. All of these lords are rather different. Let me show you how this works. I actually managed to confederate Vlad there. Okay, so for instance, this lord has an entirely different set of skills, as you can see there. So basically all of the different bloodlines, they will reinforce specific units, which is great because it just allows you such strategic options. Just as I can't wait to level this up a little bit more to get even further buffs for these units. That's basically what I wanted there. Now, you do require corruption so that you don't take attrition. This implies that you shall always be corrupting where you're going to attack. Perhaps you can lead with some heroes to gain an advantage there. You can see, for instance, let me show you the corruption there. You can see that anywhere that the corruption is high, it's really cool. But as soon as you try to move, as soon as you state to move there, you can see the symbol that you're going to suffer attrition due to the corruption. So always make sure that your vampiric corruption keeps moving on, especially to ensure that you can go into that location. Now, finally, should you lose entire units in battle, the dead rise again. It can bring back units to life. Now, this allows you to avoid having to recruit too many troops. So, as for instance, I know that these 2 units, they rose from the dead just recently. I auto-resolved, but they were risen from the dead. They were supposed to be dead, and now they're no longer dead. Well, actually, they're just undead. But yeah, basically these are the typical mechanics that you'll find with the vampire counts. Not too many, but very important and significant. In terms of province edicts, we have a control and vampiric corruption, a growth and minus construction cost for all buildings. It's really good. Growth is important for the vampire counts. You have a recruitment rank and local recruitment capacity +2, remember? And you have an income from all buildings +10%. It's a good, varied and efficient bunch, just great to use. Now, in terms of army stances, let me pick up an army right here, maybe. There we go. We have, or actually not this one. Let me pick up on good old Vlad here. So we have channeling, which is not only for the 10%, it costs 10% move, but it allows replenishment in foreign territory. This is the one that you should be using to ensure that you can replenish in foreign territory because you do not have encamp. Raid is instead the one that gives immunity to most attrition. So you can't have both. This is an issue with the vampire counts. You don't have both. You don't have replenishing and immunity to attrition in both. You see the idea? You need to choose whether you're replenishing or whether you're not taking attrition, basically. Then you have the ambush, typical 25%, and forced march, nothing to see here, basically. Now, Kasavar, where you start, has two specific buildings, both important. So an income and less recruitment duration for all units, and somewhat less recruitment cost, which is great, and then an income generated plus control. They're all very important, especially in terms of the early game. You have 7 military buildings, 5 of which require the capital. To be in the capital, to be in the province capital. You do require a secondary building, which is the armory, which at least it does allow not only the recruitment of heroes, but also recruitment of some units, which is excellent. That at least reinforces the need for that building without having to build it just for others, you know. Tier 3 units are decent, but you can't really build an army just entirely out of those. You can try, but you may struggle a little bit. Instead, it is on tier 4 and 5 where you get the top dogs. Basically, the Mortis engine, even the Terrorgeists and the Blood Knights, especially with the Vargovs here for other types of armies. You'll get most of those late game units if you can from the Raise the Dead. I advise you to get them, especially Blood Knights. Nothing wrong with having flanks protected by these guys. They just fight against everything. And they're really good for any composition. Now, growth is rather weak. Let's talk about it. It is very difficult to grow up really fast here with the vampire counts. Even though you do have some buildings, they don't provide too much growth. That's the issue. So for instance, the ossuary here, it costs a lot for that growth there. And it's even an advancement, and I'll kid you not, it's +5. You know, +5 growth for 2000, rather expensive. So, infrastructure and growth, you have a hero recruitment capacity, local recruitment capacity. It does allow you to have a lot of necromancers. I can't tell you, but you must have like 30 in the late game. So yeah, that's the good part of it. Then you have an income and control. Don't overlook it because the income is quite substantial. And then you have just a vampiric corruption one. That's it. That's all you have in terms of infrastructure. You can count this maybe as a sort of infrastructure building. The Raise Dead cost reduced does help, but of course that's an extra slot that you'll need to use for your buildings. You may not wish that. Now, it's a bland selection, but it's useful at least. So yeah, in terms of research, it's quite cool. It is mostly divided into bonuses, let's say for your cheap infantry, for your monsters, ethereal units and the crypt ones, and then for the flying units and some of the Terrorgeists, for instance, and the Vargolfs, and also for the knights, and in this case also kind of for the campaign buffs. Basically, that's what you have here. Now, having all of this, as you can see, I'm nearly finished. I just haven't got the Raise the Dead for zombies. Didn't really wanted to play with zombies on this playthrough, but yeah, I nearly have all of that, and the units are just crazy good. So I encourage you to study this so that you can maximize what you wish for in the campaign. So as always, we have your legendary lord's skills. Basically, in this case, it's more that he has 2 casting lines. In this case, of Mannfred, of course. Red line skills or army, blue line skills, or campaign, basically. Starting with the blue line, you do have immediately casualty replenishment rate and less upkeep, plus with some other bonuses with character experience gain, and additionally here the Dead Rise again, more hit points for destroyed units that are restored after battle. This is great. I never actually went into this part just because I didn't felt that it was necessary. I don't have anyone with lightning strike, for instance. It didn't really feel the necessity for that. In terms of the red line, it has good combinations, and it's easy to synergize those with some specific skills from all the bloodline lords too. So the only issue is how every lord is a caster. You may have to decide early that you wish to ensure that you have the skill points for it. So as in, I found myself in many occasions that I wasn't going for the red line because I needed the magical skills, or the other way around, that I wasn't going for caster skills because I wanted the red line skills. So yeah, that's the idea here. Now, heroes are among the best in the entire game. Let me show you here. And why are among the best? So you have the White King, a very good melee hero, excellent one. You have an additional melee hero with the Banshee. Let me just show you Where's the Banshee? Where's the Banshee? Here she is. She's also good. She increases mobility, which is excellent as well. Then you have the vampires. They are not only casters, but they're also good melee heroes, so they can hold their own. You know, a caster that can hold their own, it's really good. And then you have the necromancers, and both of these also replenish troops. So you'll have some options in terms of replenishment. You have some options in who to fight who. So yeah, most of them have casting abilities. Banshees are ethereal, so they have that advantage. You have a lot of options that you can, you know, use up specifically to target specific enemies, which is great. It's one of the best things that I find regarding the vampire counts. And in addition, you'll always have more than enough for your armies, as you can see there. Especially in terms of necromancers, you can have one in every single army, and then as scouts, that's how I would advise you to use those. So here are the red line skills for the vampire counts. They have a rather short rosters and no missile units whatsoever. It is worth noting that most are divided into categories, so it allows you to similarly upgrade low quality troops and have the same red line skill applied to elite troops. Now, Mannfred has mostly upkeep buffs for Grave Guards and Black Knights units, and also for Blood Knights. So, yep. Basically, that's the type of army that will build up for him, and maybe give him some flyers, so there's a little bit more flexibility in sieges. It sounds really cool. Then you have some combinations for the other Blood Knights, basically. You know, the Bloodlines with the Red Knight units there. Basically, those will buff the same thing. Grave Guards and Blood Knights, so it makes sense to have a good solid front line with some Blood Knights on the flanks, and maybe these two ideas of either flyers or either Mortis engines. I use these very effectively, and they're quite cheap in terms of red line skills. Well, average, let's say. Let's speak the truth. They are all casters, so they'll need some spell points and specific skill points for these, so yeah, it's kind of average for the faction. It could be better. Now, in terms of others, this is a specific example of what you can do with specific skills from those Bloodline Lords. Upkeep minus 100%. They're free for Felbats. And then you have minus 40 for Vargheists. So it's really cool to have just an army like this to go and jump on sieges. It's really cool to have one army like this to just surprise the enemy on the battlefield if they don't have a response to so many flying units. You can just jump in, and especially the Vargheists, with all the buffs they have in the late game, they're really powerful. And it's just an interesting combination to use in a battle. Then we have the Ghouls. And they have Crypt Ghouls, which will have somewhat decent buffs, you know, more leadership and physical resistance. It does help them fulfill what they need to, and they'll have better buffs from the research as well, so they'll behave nicely. And you can use those without spending too much redline skills, which is excellent. You know, just a front line of Crypt Ghouls and Crypt Horrors with some Vargheists and Vargulfs there for single entity hitting. It's really cool. I love this army, by the way. Then we have even an ethereal composition. By the way, you check these out and you think, well, maybe I wouldn't use all of those and have some other units. I actually did the same. I had some Vampire Coast units in these armies involved, and they worked wonderfully. Imagine instead of these two black coaches, I would just have two cannons. I would just have two deck gunners from the Vampire Coast. It worked wonderfully. It was really cool to have such vastly different combinations. And these ones actually worked out well. I made the additional thing of having everyone here kind of being ethereal, which is really nice on the battlefield. It's just so cool to see, and still quite cheap and effective, as you can see there. So, to resume this, it's one of the factions that may prove to be difficult in the early game. You're surrounded. You must rely on good tactics, some good magic, and some patience while you get a feel for the faction. You're gonna lose settlements. You're gonna win back them. You're gonna struggle a little bit. Just get over it. It will happen. Count on it and strategize around it, you know? I lost Pools of Despair 7 times during this playthrough, I can tell you that. Because I found out it wasn't a good place to expand earlier on. You learn, and then you're gonna think maybe next playthrough I wouldn't go there immediately. Maybe I would gift that for an alliance. That's the idea. Okay? It is, however, one of the most amazing experiences. The aesthetic alone gives you such a nice playthrough, and while you may think it is one-dimensional due to the lack of range, you'll find yourself enjoying always being the rusher and having more melee than any other enemy. You'll envelop you're going to see that they don't have any way to overcome such a massive melee army. Lords are among the best in the game. They have access to spells, they have great fighting abilities, great mounts as well, and you'll focus on their actions for the most part during battles. Now, for their armies, you have good infantry, great cavalry, great flying units, good chariots, no missile units, and you do rely on magic, especially earlier on. Replenishment is good, but the climate will cause issues. The climate was the one causing the problems. Overall, I believe it is time that you follow Mannfred von Carstein into his conquests.